The air in the grand living room of my father's mansion was thick with pretense, a veneer of warmth masking the cold disdain that always lingered beneath. It was Max's 10th birthday, and the family had gathered under the chandelier's harsh glow, their smiles as brittle as glass. My son Max sat at the center of it all, his round face glowing with innocent excitement, his small hands clasped tightly around a white apple box. The room fell silent as Dad pushed the package toward him, his voice dripping with exaggerated cheer. "Go on, open it, buddy," he said, leaning back in his chair like a king bestowing a gift upon his subject. Max hesitated for a moment, his wide eyes flickering between me and the box. His chubby fingers trembled slightly as he peeled back the wrapping paper. "Is it really an iPhone?" he whispered, his voice tinged with awe, betraying the hope blooming inside him. I felt my stomach tighten, but I forced a smile. "Open it and see," Dad chimed in, smirking over the rim of his coffee mug. Something about the way he looked at me made my skin crawl, but I didn't intervene. Not yet. When Max lifted the lid, his smile froze. Inside the pristine white box lay not the sleek device he'd been expecting, but a jagged rock, dirty, sharp-edged, and utterly absurd. For a split second, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Dad erupted into laughter, loud and grating, filling the silence like a cruel symphony. "Well," he said, taking a deliberate sip of his coffee, savoring the punchline he believed he'd nailed, "only good boys get toys, isn't that right, Max?" The laughter spread like wildfire. My sister cackled so hard she had to dab her eyes with a napkin. My brother-in-law snorted into his drink. Even my mother shook her head and chuckled softly. But Max didn't laugh. He stared at the rock, his shoulders sagging, his cheeks burning red with humiliation. Slowly he shoved the box away, biting his lip to keep from crying. When he looked at me, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, I saw it. The same pain I used to carry as a child, the same confusion and betrayal etched into every line of his tiny face. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms until they left marks. My chest tightened as memory surged forward, unbidden and unwelcome. I was 9 again, sitting in this very room, opening a similar box only to find a crumpled piece of paper inside. "Only smart kids get real presents," Dad had sneered then, his words cutting deeper than any blade. I remembered the sting of shame, the way I'd tried to laugh along with everyone else, pretending it didn't hurt. And now, decades later, history was repeating itself, with my son as the victim. "Oh, come on, Dad," I said finally, my voice strained as I fought to keep it steady. "It's just a bit of fun," he replied, waving a dismissive hand. Beside him, my sister chimed in, nudging Max's shoulder with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "It's not like it's your real present." But there was no real present. This was it, a rock in an iPhone box, a sick joke at my son's expense. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. I glanced at Max again, his head bowed, his small frame radiating defeat. Something inside me shifted, a quiet fury bubbling low in my chest. I scanned the room, meeting the smug faces of my relatives, the gleam of superiority in their eyes. They thought this was entertainment. They thought humiliating a child was funny. And in that moment I realized something. They didn't know what was coming. The laughter had barely faded when something inside me snapped. I felt it, a deep, seething rage that had been simmering for years, waiting for the right moment to boil over. Max's trembling hand was still gripping mine, his small fingers cold despite the warmth of the room. His silence spoke louder than any words ever could. He wasn't crying anymore, but the hurt in his eyes cut deeper than any scream. It was enough. I stood up slowly, deliberately, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound so sharp it silenced the last remnants of mirth in the room. Everyone froze, their smiles fading into masks of confusion and unease. My father leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow raised as if he were dealing with a child throwing a tantrum. "What's this?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "This," I said, my voice low but carrying an edge that made even my mother flinch, "is where it ends." Dad smirked, taking another sip of his coffee like nothing could touch him. "Oh, come on, Ryan. You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a joke. Just a joke." I repeated, my voice rising now, each word slicing through the air like a blade. "You humiliated my son in front of everyone here and you think it's funny? No, Dad. This isn't about jokes. This is about who you are, a coward in a cardigan hiding behind sarcasm and shame while pretending to be some kind of patriarch." The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of anger. But I wasn't done. Not even close. "You want to talk about respect? About being a good boy?" I gestured toward Max, whose wide eyes were fixed on me, unsure whether to feel proud or afraid. Let's talk about how you've treated him, how you've treated all of us. You never remembered his birthday. You barely acknowledged him unless it was to criticize him. And now this? A rock in an iPhone box? That's not a joke, Dad. That's cruelty. Pure, calculated cruelty. My sister tried to interject, her voice wavering. Ryan, stop making a scene. We're at a party. No, Emily, I shot back, cutting her off mid-sentence. This isn't a party. This is a circus, and you're all clowns performing for your own amusement. But guess what? The show's over. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty flicker across my father's face. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing around the room as if expecting someone to step in and defend him. No one did. They were too busy staring at me, mouths agape, trying to process what was happening. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a USB drive, holding it up for everyone to see. Do you know what this is? I asked, stepping forward until I was standing directly in front of the table. This is proof. Proof of everything you've done, not just today but for years. What are you talking about? Dad demanded, his voice losing its usual confidence. You really don't know? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Of course you don't. Because you thought you'd get away with it. Well, let's start with the basics, shall we? I plugged the USB into the TV mounted on the wall, ignoring the gasps that rippled through the room as document after document appeared on the screen. Bank statements, credit reports, emails, all laid bare for everyone to see. First, I began, pointing to a line item on the screen. There's the $2,200 withdrawal from Max's college fund. Care to explain that, Emily? Oh wait, I already know. You used it to pay for your luxury yoga retreat in Bali. You posted pictures online, remember? Healing your inner child on the beach while stealing from my actual child's future. Emily's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she stared at the evidence. Her husband glanced at her, then quickly looked away, guilt written all over his face. And then, I continued, turning to my father, we have these 3 credit cards opened under Max's name, using his social security number. Since he was 5 years old. The room erupted into chaos. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair toppling backward. Richard, what is he talking about? She demanded, her voice shrill with panic. Dad didn't answer. He couldn't. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might break, and for once, the smug mask he wore cracked completely. I'll tell you what this is, I said, my voice ice cold. This is identity theft, fraud, exploitation of a minor. All wrapped up in your precious family values. You've been using Max's name to protect your pathetic credit score while laughing in his face every chance you got. And you, I turned to Emily, you've been dipping into his college fund like it's your personal piggy bank. Do you even realize how much damage you've caused? Silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. Even the air seemed to thicken with tension. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, my father broke the silence, his voice low and shaky. You can't do this. Family doesn't go to court over mistakes. Mistakes. I echoed, incredulous. Is that what you call this? Stealing from a child? Betraying your own grandson? No, Dad. These aren't mistakes. These are crimes. And I'm done protecting you. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen, sending copies of the files to my lawyer, the fraud division of the bank, and Child Protective Services. The notifications flashed on the screen, loud and undeniable. That's it, I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. It's over. I've filed a police report, and trust me, the investigation won't stop until every single one of you answers for what you've done. My mother burst into tears, clutching her chest like she might faint. How could you do this to your own family? She sobbed. My family? I replied, my voice breaking for the first time. You stopped being my family a long time ago. The only family I care about is standing right here. I looked down at Max, who was watching me with a mixture of awe and relief. Come on, buddy, I said softly, reaching for his hand. We're leaving. As we walked toward the door, I heard my father's voice ring out behind us, desperate and angry. If you walk out that door, don't come back. I stopped, turned around, and met his gaze. You already made that choice, I said evenly. The second you laughed at my son, you lost the right to call yourself a grandfather. And with that, we left. The door clicked shut behind us, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. Outside, under the gray sky, Max looked up at me, his eyes filled with unshed tears. Dad, he whispered, are we okay? I knelt down in front of him, placing my hands on his shoulders. Yeah, Max, we're more than okay. From now on, it's just you and me. No one else gets to hurt you. Ever again. He nodded, wrapping his arms around me in a tight hug. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. The courtroom was packed. It felt like the entire world had crammed itself into this sterile, fluorescent-lit box of justice. My mother sat in the front row, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the harsh light, a desperate attempt to hide the tears that had been streaming down her face for days. Dad, dressed in his best blazer, looked every bit the man who thought he could charm his way out of anything. Emily clung to her husband, her face pale and drawn, as if she hadn't slept since the day I filed the police report. And then there was me and Max sitting side by side, his small hand resting on my knee, grounding me. The first day started with formalities. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, scanned the room before addressing us. This is a civil case involving allegations of fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation of a minor, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Let's proceed. My lawyer stood up, her presence commanding. She began laying out our case, piece by damning piece. First came the bank statements, clear records showing how Emily had withdrawn $2,200 from Max's college fund without authorization. Then, the surveillance footage from the birthday party, capturing the exact moment Frank handed Max the rock and laughed in his face. The room fell silent as the video played, the sound of their laughter echoing coldly through the courtroom. But it wasn't until day 2 that things really got interesting. My lawyer presented the credit card applications tied to Max's social security number. Each one bore Frank's signature, each one opened under his address. The prosecutor asked the banker who handled the accounts to take the stand. He testified that the phone number used during verification calls matched Frank's personal cell. Did you suspect anything unusual? The prosecutor asked. Not at first, the banker admitted. But when we reviewed the files after receiving the fraud report, it became clear these accounts were being exploited. A 9-year-old doesn't typically need 3 credit cards. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. When it was his turn to testify, he tried to play innocent. I don't recall opening those accounts, he said, his voice shaky but defiant. That's when my lawyer dropped the bombshell, the voicemail recording. It played over the speakers, loud and undeniable. Frank's voice filled the room. It's just some cards, for God's sake. He's a kid, he's not going to use the credit. What's the big deal? The courtroom went deathly quiet. My mother lowered her sunglasses, staring at Frank like she didn't recognize him. Even the judge raised an eyebrow, jotting something down in her notes. Frank's lawyer scrambled to object, but the damage was done. Emily took the stand reluctantly, her hands trembling as she swore to tell the truth. Her husband sat stiffly beside her, avoiding eye contact. Under questioning, she admitted to forging my signature to withdraw money from Max's college fund. I needed it for Ellie's therapy, she stammered, her voice breaking. You mean your Bali yoga retreat? My lawyer countered, pulling up screenshots of her Instagram posts. She froze, unable to deny it. And what about the forged withdrawal slip? The prosecutor pressed. I thought Ryan would understand, she whispered. No, Miss Carter, my lawyer said, her tone icy. You thought you wouldn't get caught. That's the difference. Then came the audio recordings, conversations between me and Emily where she casually mentioned using Max's account for family emergencies. By the time she stepped down from the stand, her composure was shattered. She collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. The final day of the trial was tense. Everyone waited anxiously as the judge delivered her ruling. Based on the evidence presented, she began, her voice steady, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Emily Carter is ordered to repay the $2,200 taken from the minor's college fund, plus additional fines totaling $1,500. Richard Carter is fined $10,000 for identity theft and misuse of a minor's information. Furthermore, Mr. Carter will be investigated for elder fraud related to mismanagement of family funds. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The court also recommends sealing the minor's credit history indefinitely to prevent further exploitation, she added. Finally, compensatory damages of $25,000 are awarded to the plaintiff. As the gavel struck, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. Outside the courthouse, Emily chased after me, her heels clicking against the pavement. You've destroyed this family, she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. No, I replied, turning to face her. You destroyed it. I just exposed the rubble. Max stood beside me, clutching his new phone case, the one he'd designed himself. On it was a simple message, Only good boys get toys. What does that mean? Emily asked, her voice softer now, almost pleading. It means bad grandpas don't deserve good grandsons anymore, Max said quietly, his voice firm. For the first time I saw Emily falter. She blinked rapidly, like she couldn't process what she was hearing. Without another word, I turned and walked away, Max's hand in mine. As we drove home, Max broke the silence. Are we done, Dad? Is it over? I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Yeah, buddy. It's over. He nodded, satisfied, and leaned back in his seat. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt a sense of peace. We weren't running from anyone anymore. We were free. 3 months had passed since the trial. 3 months of silence, of rebuilding, of finally breathing freely for the first time in years. Max and I had settled into a rhythm, quiet nights reading together, weekends at the park, and the occasional karate lesson where he was slowly learning to defend himself, both physically and emotionally. Life felt lighter, brighter, like we'd stepped out of a shadow that had been looming over us for far too long. But shadows have a way of creeping back when you least expect them. It started with a phone call at 6 a.m. The screen lit up with my mother's name, and even before I answered, I knew something was wrong. Her voice trembled as she spoke, each word laced with desperation. Ryan, it's your father. He's in the hospital. Heart attack. They say he needs a procedure, but... She hesitated, her voice breaking. We can't afford it. The court took too much. I clenched the phone tighter, my knuckles whitening. Mom, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me, you're asking me to help him? He regrets it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He thinks about it every night, the rock, the way he looked at Max. Please just come see him. For Max. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Hanging up felt like severing another invisible thread tying me to that toxic past, but I did it anyway. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and stared out at the gray morning sky. A week later, a letter arrived from my aunt, one of the few relatives who hadn't taken sides during the trial. Inside was a clipping from the local newspaper. Longtime Councilman Richard Turner hospitalized after cardiac complications. Family now struggling financially after recent legal issues. Below the article was a GoFundMe link. Goal, $40,000. Raised, $3,200. Top comment, hope the son finds it in his heart to forgive. Donation from Emily Turner, $10. I crumpled the paper in my fist and tossed it into the trash. Pathetic. Days later, another call came, an unknown number this time. I almost ignored it, but something, maybe curiosity or the faint hope for closure, made me answer. Hey son, the voice on the other end rasped, weak and trembling. It was Dad. For a moment I couldn't speak. His voice sounded foreign, frail, broken, nothing like the man who used to tower over me with sarcastic remarks and cutting words. I don't sleep anymore, he admitted after a long pause. I think about it, about what I did to Max. The rock, the way I looked in his eyes. I thought I was being funny. Turns out I was being cruel. Just like I've always been. My chest tightened, but I stayed silent. I don't deserve forgiveness, he continued, his voice cracking. But if you ever showed up, I know it's not over. That maybe I still have a chance. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the phone. Max made a custom phone case at school, I said, my voice cold but steady. It says only good boys get toys. There was a long pause on the other end. That's good, Dad finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. What does it mean? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It means bad grandpas don't have grandsons anymore. Click. I ended the call without another word. A week later, I found myself driving through the old neighborhood. Not intentionally, just habit. As I pulled into the strip mall parking lot, I saw them. My family, or what was left of it. Dad sat in a wheelchair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his face gaunt and pale. Mom stood beside him, holding a stack of flyers. Emily handed them out to passers-by, her smile forced and brittle. On the flyers, bold letters screamed, "Help Richard Turner. Family matters most." Below the text was a QR code linking to the GoFundMe page. I parked the car and watched from a distance. Emily noticed me first. Her smile faltered, then flickered back to life as she jogged toward me. "You came," she said, her voice tinged with relief. "I knew you weren't as cold as you pretended." I said nothing, just stared at her. "We were wrong, all of us," she pleaded, her voice rising. "But we're still family." "No," I replied, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We were a cult where love was conditional and money was currency. And now the God you worshipped, status, control, image, has failed." She blinked, stunned. If it's not about money, then why does your flyer have a QR code and not an apology? She flinched, unable to respond. I turned around and walked back to the car. Max was in the passenger seat, watching silently. When Emily caught sight of him, she raised her hand to wave. He didn't wave back. Didn't even blink. He just looked at her like she was another stranger in the crowd. That was the moment I realized Max had learned faster than I ever did. We drove away, and in the rearview mirror, I saw Dad trying to stand, his hand reaching out like he could pull me back in time. But I was already gone. That night, Max and I sat in our tiny living room with popcorn and a movie. Do you miss them? I asked, glancing at him. He thought for a second, then shook his head. I miss who they could have been, he said softly. But I'm glad I've got you. I felt a lump rise in my throat. He rested his head on my shoulder, and I put my arm around him, pulling him close. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the failure. I wasn't the loser. I was the dad who showed up. The one who said enough. The one who finally broke the cycle. I didn't lose my family. I built a new one. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, painting golden streaks across the small living room where Max and I sat. It had been 6 months since we walked out of that courtroom, 6 months since we left behind the toxic ruins of what once called itself a family. Life was different now, lighter, quieter, but richer in ways I never thought possible. Max had grown taller, his shoulders squaring off with newfound confidence. He wasn't just the boy who once stared at a rock in an iPhone box. He was becoming someone stronger, wiser, and unapologetically himself. And it showed in everything he did, even in the custom phone case he designed for his new smartphone. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Max handed me his phone. Dad, he said, his voice steady and proud, I made this. On the back of the phone case was a bold design, a jagged rock surrounded by cracked glass, with the words etched clearly above it, Bad grandpas don't deserve good grandsons. I stared at it, my throat tightening. That's something, I managed to say, my voice rough with emotion. It's true, Max replied matter-of-factly, his eyes meeting mine without hesitation. He laughed at me, Dad. But now I laugh last. For a moment I couldn't speak. Then I pulled him into a hug, holding him tighter than usual. You're incredible, you know that? I learned from the best, he said, grinning up at me. It wasn't just a phone case, it was a declaration. A statement of resilience, defiance, and pride. In that moment, I realized how much Max had grown, not because of what happened but despite it. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a warmth that felt almost symbolic. One Saturday morning, I woke Max up earlier than usual. Get dressed, I told him, smiling mysteriously. We've got work to do. What kind of work? He asked groggily, rubbing his eyes. Important work, I replied, handing him a pair of gardening gloves. In the backyard, I'd already dug 2 holes in the soil, one larger, one smaller. Beside them lay 2 saplings, a cherry tree and a young maple. We're planting trees? Max asked, his curiosity piqued. Yeah, I said, kneeling down beside him. These aren't just any trees. They're symbols. This 1 inch, I pointed to the cherry tree, is for us. For starting over, growing together, building something strong. And the other one? He asked, tilting his head. That's for you, I said softly. To remind you that no matter what happens, you can always grow beyond the cracks. You're rooted in strength, Max. Always have been. He nodded solemnly, then grabbed a handful of dirt and sprinkled it around the base of the maple sapling. So, even if bad things happen, I'll still be okay? Exactly, I said, ruffling his hair. And so will I. As we worked side by side, filling the holes with soil and patting it down carefully, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. These trees weren't just plants, they were promises. Promises of growth, renewal, and the future we were creating together. Later that afternoon, as we sat under the shade of the old oak tree in the corner of the yard, Max leaned against me, his head resting on my shoulder. Do you think they'll ever change? He asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Who? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Grandpa. Aunt Emily. The rest of them. I sighed, staring out at the horizon. Some people are too stuck in their ways to change, buddy. Your grandpa spent his whole life pretending he was perfect, hiding behind rules and sarcasm instead of showing real love. Some people don't know how to fix themselves. But we fixed ourselves, Max said, sitting up straighter. Right? I smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. Yeah, we did. And that's what matters. We didn't wait for anyone else to save us. We saved each other. He nodded thoughtfully, then grinned. Besides, we're better off without them. You bet we are, I agreed, pulling him into a playful headlock. That night, as I tucked Max into bed, I paused in the doorway, watching him drift off to sleep. His breathing was soft, steady, and peaceful, the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're safe, loved, and valued. For years, I carried the weight of being the disappointment, the son who could never measure up, the man who would always fall short. But now, looking at Max, I saw something else entirely. I saw a father who showed up, who fought for his child when no one else would, who refused to let history repeat itself. I closed the door gently and stepped outside, standing beneath the stars. The air smelled fresh, tinged with the earthy scent of newly planted soil. It reminded me of the promise I'd made, not just to Max but to myself. I thought about my father, about the way he used laughter as a weapon and shame as a shield. I thought about the countless dinners where I sat silent, swallowing insults and hoping for scraps of approval. And then I thought about Max, about the way he looked at me now, with trust, admiration, and unconditional love. It hit me then, I wasn't like my father. I never had been. I wasn't the man who handed a child a rock and called it a gift. I wasn't the man who laughed while tearing someone down. I was the man who stood up, who said enough, who built a home filled with kindness and respect. For the first time in my life I felt proud, not of what I achieved, not of what others thought of me, but of who I was. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows, I found Max watering the newly planted trees. He turned to me, his face glowing with determination. "They're going to grow big, Dad," he said confidently. "Just like us." I smiled, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Yeah, buddy. Just like us." We stood there for a moment, side by side, watching the gentle breeze sway the tiny branches. Behind us, the house hummed with life, our life. Not perfect, not extravagant, but ours. And in that moment I knew, the cycle was broken.